Welcome to The Explainer. You know, when you look at the world today, it feels like we're all watching a giant global game of tug of war. On one end of the rope, you've got forces trying to build order, write new rules, and just hold everything together. And on the other end, you've got this immense pressure, economic, military, diplomatic, pulling it all apart. Our job today, it's to find the pattern in all that pushing and pulling. So, let's get right into it.
All right, so here's the plan. We're going to break down this global tug of war in 5 parts. First, we'll look at the people trying to make the rules. Then we're going to follow the money. After that, we'll visit the actual front lines, then check out the big diplomatic chess game. And finally, we'll land on what this all means for real people. Think of it as our class syllabus for today.
So, part 1, fortifying the rules. In a world that feels pretty chaotic most of the time, we're asking a simple question. Who's out there actually trying to build stronger walls and write a playbook that everyone can follow?
And our first stop is Europe. The EU's new Media Freedom Act just went into effect, and it's a big deal. You can think of it like a legal fortress they're trying to build around the press. It does 3 main things. First, and this is crucial, it protects journalists from being targeted with spyware. Second, it demands transparency, so media outlets have to show you who actually owns them. And third, it shields editors from political or corporate pressure. This isn't just some small regulation, it's a direct systemic answer to the rise of disinformation and attacks on journalism.
Okay, so from building rules for the press, we pivot to enforcing rules on the powerful. Over in South Korea, the former First Lady, Kim Keon-hee, was just questioned as a criminal suspect in a big corruption probe. This is happening while her husband, the former president, is also facing investigations. It really showcases what some are calling South Korea's robust, if tumultuous, approach to political accountability. Yeah, the process is messy and political for sure, but it's a powerful message. In a working democracy, the rules are supposed to apply to everyone, no matter how high up you are.
And that brings us to a really stark contrast. In Haiti, a new leader, Laurent Saint-Cyr, is now in charge of a transitional council. His job is to somehow guide the country towards an election, but his problem is way more fundamental. I mean, how do you even begin to build a state when a powerful gang leader can openly threaten your inauguration and actually have people take him seriously? It just shows you the huge gap between countries that are reinforcing their rules and those that are fighting just to lay down the most basic foundation of authority.
All right, let's shift gears. Part 2, the global economic squeeze. We've talked about laws and rules. Now, let's talk about the raw power of money. We're going to see how economics is being used as one of the main weapons in this global tug of war. As they say, follow the money. And we kick things off with a huge move by the United States. New reciprocal tariffs, 10% or more, are now officially in effect. And we're not talking about just 1 or 2 countries here. This is hitting over 60 nations. By doing this under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the US is basically saying global trade isn't just about business anymore, it's about national security. It's a massive use of economic muscle to try and reshape global commerce.
Now, if those tariffs were an economic sledgehammer, this next move is more like a sniper rifle. The US government just doubled the reward for any information that could lead to the arrest of Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro. And the new total is $50 million. That's a staggering number, and it's designed to make a very loud statement, both inside and outside Venezuela.
So, what does a move like this actually signal? Well, it shows a major shift in policy. You're moving away from broad economic sanctions that kind of punish everybody in a country, and you're moving towards directly targeting a specific person, a head of state, with serious legal accusations. It's making the pressure intensely personal. And, you know, as the source material points out, this isn't some movie plot. This is real life, and it's a very high-stakes gamble. The economic squeeze isn't always loud and aggressive, though. Sometimes it's quiet and strategic. Take China's state-owned shipping giant, Costco. They're reportedly in talks to buy a major stake in a company that controls ports all over the world. Now, there are 2 ways to look at this. From China's perspective, it makes perfect sense. You're securing your spot in the global supply chain. But for everyone else, the concern is that this could give Beijing strategic control over the very infrastructure the entire world's economy relies on. It's another way of pulling on that economic rope, just a lot more quietly. Which brings us to part 3,
So we've seen people pulling on the rope with laws and with money. But what happens when that rope gets pulled so tight that it snaps? Well, that's when you get to the flashpoints, the front lines, where the metaphorical tug of war becomes a very, very real fight.
Our first flashpoint takes us to Gaza. Israel's security cabinet just greenlit a military plan to take control of Gaza City, aiming to dismantle Hamas. But the military operation itself might not even be the hardest part. The real nagging challenge is captured perfectly in that question that always follows these things. What happens the day after? The plan talks about handing control to friendly Arab forces, but actually finding groups that are willing, legitimate, and effective enough to govern, well, that's a political nightmare with no easy solution in sight.
Now, let's head over to the Democratic Republic of Congo for a story that's unfolding on two different levels. First, on the ground, the fighting is getting worse. In the eastern part of the country, clashes between M23 rebels and pro-government forces have gotten more intense. The rebels have apparently taken several more villages, they're gaining ground, and peace talks are on hold. So militarily, things are not looking good. And then, at the exact same time, all that is happening on the battlefield, what do we hear from the capital? The DRC government has just announced a huge reshuffle of its cabinet, saying it's to help them tackle this security crisis more effectively.
So here's where we need to connect the dots. Is shuffling a few ministers around in the capital really a solution for a decades-long, incredibly complex conflict happening hundreds of miles away? Or is it just a technique to look busy? The evidence really points to the latter. A cabinet reshuffle is a classic political move. It gives the appearance of action, but it does absolutely nothing to fix the deep-rooted problems driving the violence, like ethnic tensions, foreign meddling, or the fight over the region's incredible mineral wealth. And these flashpoints, they come in all shapes and sizes. You have the constant simmering conflicts, like in Pakistan, where security forces just killed 33 militants near the Afghan border. That's not a new war, it's just the steady, deadly pulse of an old one. And then you get something completely different, a wild, cross-border legal battle between South Africa and Zambia over where to bury Zambia's former president. It's this bizarre, somber dispute that honestly feels like it's pulled straight from a prestige TV drama.
Okay, on to our fourth section. If the front lines are where the fighting is out in the open, diplomacy is the global chessboard. This is where the game is played behind the scenes, with calculated moves and power plays, as nations try to get an edge without ever firing a shot. And the first move on our board today is a huge one. Donald Trump has apparently floated an idea for how to get a peace deal in Ukraine. The really explosive part of this idea is that it could involve, quote, some swapping of territories. And that phrase alone has sparked immediate and profound fear that Ukraine could be pushed to officially give up land that Russia currently occupies, all in exchange for an end to the war.
And this idea just lays the massive stakes out on the table. On one hand, yeah, the potential outcome is an end to a horrible, devastating war. But the risk on the other side is almost impossible to overstate. A deal like that would be seen by most of the world as rewarding military aggression. It would basically say that you can redraw borders by force. And that, right there, would challenge the entire international order we've lived with since World War II, which is built on the idea that you can't just invade your neighbor and keep their land. It would be a potential earthquake for the global system. From a potential deal to a very direct warning, Beijing has just sent a really sharp diplomatic message to the Philippines over some comments about Taiwan. And with tensions already sky high in the South China Sea, the message here is crystal clear, and it's not just for Manila. It's a signal to the entire region. When it comes to Taiwan, which Beijing sees as its absolute #1 issue, there's no middle ground. You have to pick a side. It's a diplomatic red line, drawn in very dark ink. This diplomatic chess game isn't just about new fights, either. Sometimes it's about digging up old ones. For decades, a border dispute between Colombia and Peru over this tiny little island in the Amazon was basically asleep. Nobody talked about it. But now, Colombia's president has decided to publicly reignite the whole thing. It's a powerful reminder that old, forgotten conflicts can be brought back to life, usually for domestic political reasons, and in the process, they risk creating brand new instability where there was peace.
And our last diplomatic move comes from India. Prime Minister Modi has confirmed he's going to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in China. Now, the SCO is a big Eurasian alliance led by China and Russia. So at the very same time India is getting closer to the West, this move shows they are still fully committed to what they call multi-alignment. It's classic diplomatic chess. You make sure you have a seat at all the important tables, whether they're Western or not, just to keep all your options open. India's playing on multiple boards at once.
And that brings us to our fifth and final section for today. We've talked about rules, money, wars, and chess moves. But what does all of this high-level stuff actually mean for people? This section is about the realities on the ground, the real human consequences of this global power struggle. Let's start with a really stark, frankly frightening reality. The United Nations is sounding the alarm on a massive humanitarian funding crisis. To deal with all the world's crises in 2025, they need $46 billion. So how much have they actually gotten? Just $7.8 billion. That's less than 17% of what's needed, and it's a 40% drop from last year. The takeaway here is both simple and devastating. As global crises get worse, the money to help people is drying up. And that gap, that massive gap, represents millions of real people left without a lifeline.
Now, from a global crisis to a profound national change. 3.68 million. That is the new record-high number of foreign residents now living in Japan. For a country that for most of its modern history has been famously homogeneous, that number represents nothing short of a quiet revolution. So why is this happening now? Well, what's driving this historic shift are two forces that are basically unstoppable. First, Japan has one of the fastest aging populations on the planet. And because of that, second, it's facing critical labor shortages in almost every part of its economy. So the result is that immigration is no longer really a political choice for Japan. It's become an economic and demographic necessity. And that necessity is slowly but surely changing the very fabric of Japanese society.
Let's end this section on a genuinely good piece of news, a small victory for our shared heritage. A fire broke out at the historic Mosque Cathedral of Cordoba in Spain, which is a priceless World Heritage Site. But firefighters got there incredibly fast and contained it. It was a close call, and it brought back these terrible memories of the Notre Dame fire. The feeling was captured perfectly as a collective sigh of relief. It's just a great reminder to cherish these pieces of shared history that we can all too easily lose. So, after all that, what have we seen today? A new EU law, a brewing trade war, a bounty on a president's head, simmering conflicts, a potential peace deal that could shake the world, deep demographic shifts. It really does feel like a world being pulled in a million directions at once, doesn't it? But all these stories, they're connected. They're all different threads in that great global tug of war. And in the middle of all that noise, trying to understand the pattern, that's everything. And that's really our whole mission here, to help you see that pattern by just focusing on the facts, by connecting the dots for you, and by trying to strip away all the emotional spin. Our hope is that we can give you a clearer space to form your own understanding of how the world really works, because we believe that in such a noisy world, that kind of clarity is more valuable than ever. So if you do find this approach valuable, the best way you can possibly support our mission is just to help other people find it. You know, sharing this explainer with a friend or a family member or a colleague who you think would appreciate a clearer view of the news. That really helps us build a community of people who are dedicated to understanding, not just reacting. And as we close out, I'll leave you with one final thought to chew on. In this global tug of war, with all its pressures and all its rules, which side of the rope do you find yourself on, and why? To keep making sense of it all with us, follow us on Spotify and YouTube to listen to this podcast every morning at 8 a.m. GMT. Thanks for joining The Explainer. We'll see you tomorrow.